Hello Art 2 students. So the purpose of this video is going to show you a way that you can actually design sort of the interior of your tessellated shape within your pattern. You do have a couple of options. You can do something that is more just color and pattern and design based, or like we've talked about a couple of times, you can actually turn your shape into a recognizable something. So remember, you've got, at this point, you should have your entire design drawn on the paper. So this one you can see I've got my entire pattern drawn on there. That one was a rotation one. This one is a reflection one. Remember, which is where the stencil flips and sort of reflects almost. So it looks like you're looking into a mirror on both sides. Then we've got this example, which remember was another reflection example. Let me just make my screen a bit bigger for you. And then the last example that we had worked on previously was the, I'm losing my mind now whether this was a rotation or a reflection. But as you can see, either way, you've got your stencil completely used. You have drawn all of your pattern onto your paper. So then the next thing to do is to decide whether you want to use patterns or designs or colors, or like in this case, I have drawn sort of a bird on my stencil shape here, but I want to repeat it in these other sections. However, if I tried to draw each one individually, chances are they would not necessarily all look the same. So what I'm going to do is use a piece of tracing paper. And just in case you have not used tracing paper before, it's a very helpful way of basically replicating a pattern to be able to use it more than once. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and trace the entire shape, including the actual tessellated stencil shape. That way, when I'm putting it down to reuse it throughout my pattern, I can make sure that it lines up correctly. So we're just going to carefully trace everything that we see here. I do believe by now most of you have used tracing paper in my class at some point. But using the tracing paper for this project is just a little bit different, and I'll explain that momentarily. It's a little bit easier, actually. Just tracing the beak here. It does take a little bit of time to trace all of the details carefully, especially the first tracing that you do, but you do want to make sure that you take that time to do that neatly and to do that well. Because then the rest of your design, the rest of your tracings, all come from that initial one. So now once I've got my entire design traced onto the tracing paper, one of the nice things about working with a tessellation that you don't often get to experience is that now I can actually, if it lines up, which it should line up at some point, maybe only on the reflection one, but on the reflection one you can actually use the opposite side to then just go ahead and directly draw. But on this one, what we're going to need to do, because it is a rotation, we will still need to trace onto the back. But when you are tracing onto the back, the more important thing to do is to trace the actual design inside of the shape. You don't have to focus as much on the actual shape itself, because on your paper, the shapes are all drawn. We just need to focus on making sure that we have those internal parts, that we can add them. Remember that when you are tracing onto the back of your paper, it's okay if you have to turn your page, because you're tracing something that is on the other side. It will not alter what you are tracing at all. So once again, this is especially helpful on the reflection type of transformation, because you have to use both sides of your tracing. So essentially this whole sort of in-between step of tracing onto the back of the tracing paper, you can do directly onto your actual pattern. So I'll show you that in just a little bit as well in a separate video. But now I have that traced onto both sides, so then when I go to place it down on my next portion here, since I have graphite on both sides now, all I have to do is line that pattern up and then draw it again. So there's a lot of repeating within this type of a design. So it can get a little bit tedious, it can get a little bit monotonous, but it does often turn out quite well. Now remember, at this point, you do not necessarily need to do every single shape within your pattern the same. So I could have some of these be birds and some of them not. The tessellation will still be there and will still be successful, regardless of whether every single shape within the pattern is designed and decorated exactly the same. As long as the shape itself is identical and is properly transformed, whether that is rotation, slide, or reflection, then you're good to go. Oops, did not mean to move that off. If that happens, like I'm doing right now, just line it back up and then finish your design. Now sometimes you may choose to only use part of the design on certain shapes, and that's fine too. So the exact amount of your sort of design that you transfer to each section is up to you. Because like I said, once you have drawn the tessellated pattern, then the shape is still going to be a tessellation regardless of whether the design interior repeats or not. So then at this point I would probably want to darken some of my lines simply because some of them are a little bit light. Now another option that you could have here would be if you wanted to do a different type of animal or a different bird in each section, you absolutely could. So right now I'm just making my lines a little bit more visible. Still not making them dark because I don't know yet exactly how I want to finish the coloring steps here. So I want to keep my pencil lines nice and light. But I do want to make sure that they are more visible. So that would be an example of my little bird here repeated using the tracing paper. And then I could do that over and over again on every single time that that shape is in my design. Or if I chose to, I could change it up each time. As you can see, I shifted a little bit on this eye. So if I were you, I would just kind of erase this little portion. And I'm just going to put my stencil back down, line it up. Making sure that I've got it in there correctly. And I'm just going to trace back over my lines again, because chances are I just left something out. And I don't want to try to necessarily freehand it back in there if I have the option of just redrawing it. So there, you can see it a little bit better now. I think on my initial tracing, some of my lines were just a little bit light. But so there we've got my fish repeated. The other option was that I did design sort of a fish. I'm sorry, this was the bird. I did design a fish also. So I could easily use the fish on some of these, the bird on some of these. I could add in something else entirely. So like I was saying, exactly how you choose to finish your pattern is up to you. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit right here so that you can see those two birds. But I could have just as easily done a fish in this section, the bird in that one, and then I could have done another bird here, and I could have done another fish here. The exact way, once again, that you finish out your tessellation with the patterns and designs is up to you. I want you guys to have some freedom and some fun with expressing how you choose to do this.